Jack Elam finally spoke the truth about Gary Cooper. He was Hollywood's grizzled outlaw, the character actor with the unforgettable face who stole scenes from legends. For decades, Jack Elam kept his opinions to himself. Professional, diplomatic, grateful for the work. But there was one name that made his blood boil. One Hollywood icon everyone worshipped that Jack Elam couldn't stand. Gary Cooper, America's hero. The tall, stoic cowboy who defined an era. And when Jack Elam finally spoke his truth about Cooper, he held nothing back. Gary Cooper never impressed me. He was always just there. You'd have these great character actors carrying a scene, and Cooper would just mutter a line, and critics would call it brilliant. I never saw brilliance. This isn't a story about jealousy. It's about something deeper. About the character actors who worked themselves to the bone while leading men coasted on their looks. And about one man who refused to pretend anymore. Jack Elam was born William Scott Elam on November 13, 1920 in Miami, Arizona. He was one of Hollywood's most recognizable and unforgettable character actors. From his earliest years, Elam showed an interest in storytelling and performance. Traits that would later define his long and illustrious career in film and television. After serving in the United States Navy during World War II, where he developed a sense of discipline and resilience, he pursued a career in acting. Elam's striking physical appearance, particularly his distinct misaligned eye, initially set him apart in the world of Hollywood. Rather than seeing it as a disadvantage, he turned it into a hallmark of his persona, creating a naturally menacing or quirky presence that became his trademark on screen. Elam's career spanned over 5 decades, during which he appeared in more than 200 film and television roles. He became especially famous for his work in westerns, a genre that seemed almost tailor-made for his rugged, unconventional look and commanding presence. Films throughout the 60s cemented his reputation as the quintessential bad guy. Though Elam often brought a unique mix of menace and humor to his characters, audiences were drawn not just to his villainous roles but also to the subtle humanity he occasionally infused into them, making him a deeply memorable presence in every story he graced. Beyond his work in westerns, Jack Elam displayed remarkable versatility, moving effortlessly between genres. He appeared in comedies, dramas, and even family-friendly films, proving that his talent could transcend typecasting. His collaborations with other iconic actors and directors of his era showcased his professionalism and the respect he garnered in the industry. Elam's appearances on television were equally prolific, including roles in classic series where he left an indelible mark on American pop culture. In the mid-70s, Jack Elam took on a role in a short-lived but memorable comedy series. In this show, Elam portrayed a rough-edged, long-lost father who suddenly reappears in the lives of his children. The story centered on his unconventional attempt to raise 4 children he barely knew. Although the series lasted for only 8 episodes, it was notable for pairing Elam with future stars who would go on to worldwide fame. Even though the show struggled with low ratings and was quickly canceled, critics admired Elam's performance, noting that his rugged persona and eccentric screen presence added a unique layer to the family-centered comedy. Elam continued experimenting with unusual roles on television, demonstrating a willingness to step outside the gritty Western typecasting that had defined much of his earlier career. In the late 70s, he appeared in a quirky sitcom, taking on the unexpected part of Frankenstein's monster. This peculiar comedy blended humor with the absurdity of playing a legendary horror figure in a lighthearted sitcom. Unfortunately, the show never found its audience and was canceled after just 3 episodes. Interestingly, all episodes eventually aired in the United Kingdom, giving British audiences a chance to see Elam's unusual comedic turn, which remains something of a curiosity in his long career. Even in the 90s, Elam continued to make appearances that highlighted his versatility. He took on a role in a hugely popular sitcom, sharing the screen with another Hollywood legend. For audiences who remembered him as a menacing outlaw in westerns, seeing Elam bring laughter to a modern family sitcom highlighted just how broad his acting range truly was. On the big screen, Elam further cemented his reputation for eccentric comedy with his role in a 1981 action comedy blockbuster. The film featured an all-star cast and was a rollicking cross-country car race filled with slapstick humor and outrageous characters. Elam's performance stood out as one of the film's most offbeat highlights, showcasing his gift for turning even the smallest role into something memorable. So well received was his portrayal that Elam reprised the role 3 years later in the sequel. In 1986, Elam appeared in a film that blended Western themes with science fiction. It was during the making of this movie that Elam experienced one of the most profound personal connections of his life. On set, he met an 11-year-old boy who suffered from a rare condition that causes rapid aging. Despite their differences in age and life circumstances, Elam and the boy formed an extraordinary bond. Their friendship was later documented in a film that showed how deeply the two cared for each other and how Elam's warmth and humanity shone through off-screen just as brightly as his charisma did on screen. Elam once remarked, "I've met a lot of people, but I've never met anybody that got next to me like Mickey." The relationship revealed a tender and compassionate side to Elam that audiences rarely saw in his tough guy roles. If this story about Jack Elam touches your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Elam's long and distinguished career received formal recognition in 1994 when he was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at a prestigious museum. This honor placed him alongside some of the most respected names in the history of Western film and television. The induction was a fitting tribute to an actor who had not only defined himself through unforgettable villainous and comic performances, but had also contributed to the enduring legacy of the Western genre. When people think of Jack Elam, they often remember his signature lazy eye, his grizzled face, and his ability to steal nearly any scene he was in, whether as a villain in a Western or as a comedic old-timer later in his career. But behind the scenes, Elam was known as a man who spoke his mind without hesitation. He had strong opinions about nearly everyone he ever worked with. And one actor who particularly rubbed him the wrong way was none other than Gary Cooper, the legendary star of classic Hollywood westerns and dramas. Gary Cooper was celebrated as one of the greatest screen icons of his generation. He was famous for his quiet dignity, his understated style, and his ability to convey strength with just a few words. To many, he was the very definition of a Western hero. But to Jack Elam, Cooper represented almost everything he disliked about Hollywood's golden age leading men. Elam believed that Cooper had been overrated, and that his supposed natural acting was little more than, as Elam once said, standing around and mumbling while everyone else did the work. Elam would often tell stories in interviews or on film sets about his less than flattering experiences with Cooper. "Gary Cooper never impressed me," Elam reportedly said. "He was always just there." You'd have these great character actors carrying a scene, giving everything they had, and Cooper would just mutter a line in that low voice of his, and the critics would call it brilliant. I never saw brilliance. I saw a guy who got by on looking good in a cowboy hat. Part of Elam's disdain came from what he considered Cooper's lack of work ethic. While Elam himself worked tirelessly to perfect even small roles, often showing up on set early and staying late to go over dialogue, he claimed that Cooper coasted on his star power. "If you asked me who I thought was lazy, I'd say Gary Cooper without blinking," Elam once remarked. He didn't rehearse. He didn't push himself. He didn't care if the scene sparkled. He just wanted to get through it and collect the paycheck. Meanwhile, the rest of us were sweating blood, trying to make it all work. Elam also had strong feelings about the way Cooper treated others on set. While Cooper had a reputation among many as polite and reserved, Elam saw him differently. People said he was a gentleman, Elam noted. Maybe if you were a studio head or a pretty actress. But if you were just some working character guy like me, he didn't bother with you. He barely acknowledged you. I've got no respect for that. For a man like Elam, who prided himself on being approachable and friendly to everyone from the biggest star to the stagehand, this kind of aloofness was unforgivable. Perhaps most infuriating to Elam was the way Cooper was lionized by critics and audiences even when, in Elam's view, he gave lifeless performances. Elam thought Cooper's Academy Award for one of his most famous films was one of the most undeserved in film history. You could have put a cigar store Indian in that role and gotten the same performance, Elam scoffed. But because it was Cooper, everybody bowed down. I never understood it. Elam, being blunt as ever, once summarized his feelings by saying Gary Cooper was like wallpaper. He was there. He filled the space. But you didn't notice him unless someone told you to. And yet somehow he became this giant of cinema. To me, that says more about Hollywood's obsession with looks than with talent. Despite his criticisms, Elam acknowledged that Cooper had his devoted fans and that his image as the tall, stoic cowboy was something the public craved. But that didn't stop Elam from expressing his discontent. He was the American hero, sure, Elam admitted, but only because people wanted to believe in that image. He wasn't the best actor, not by a long shot. He wasn't even the best actor in most of his movies, but he looked the part, and that was enough for the studios. In the end, Jack Elam's dislike of Gary Cooper was rooted in his lifelong frustration with Hollywood's tendency to glorify leading men while overlooking the gritty, hard-working character actors who gave films their soul. To Elam, Cooper symbolized that imbalance, the unfairness of a system that rewarded looks and aura over depth and sweat. And for a man like Jack Elam, who built his career on sheer determination and an unshakable work ethic, that was something he could never forgive. Jack Elam was married twice. First to a woman he loved deeply until her death from cancer in 1961. 7 months later, he married again. The couple remained together for 42 years until October 20th, 2003, when Jack died of congestive heart failure at their home in Ashland, Oregon. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories about Hollywood's forgotten heroes. Share this with someone who needs to understand that the character actors matter just as much as the leading men. Because Jack Elam's confession about Gary Cooper reveals something profound about Hollywood's golden age. That behind the glamour and the Oscars, there was a class system. Leading men who coasted on their looks, and character actors who sweated blood to make every scene work. Jack Elam spent 50 years playing outlaws and eccentrics, stealing scenes from legends, working harder than almost anyone around him. And when he finally spoke the truth about Gary Cooper, he wasn't being bitter. He was being honest about what it really took to make great films, and about the men who got the credit versus the men who did the work. That's Jack Elam's legacy. Not just the unforgettable face or the lazy eye, but the work ethic, the honesty, and the refusal to pretend that everyone in Hollywood deserved the pedestal they stood on.